Now that was some great scoring. Really, really enjoyed that, Lorenzo. It's really early in the morning over here. Actually, not too early. It's about 7 a.m., and it's my New Zealand birthday. And I'm going to see if I can get through maybe 4 or 5 of the remaining 8 evaluations out of 146 entries that I received for the Orchestration Challenge this year. And I'm feeling very special about it. Just I think it's a really great thing to be doing around my birthday. Anybody who wants to wish me a happy birthday, just please comment on these last few entries. The last 5 entries for the website evaluations, and then these last 8 entries for the Patreon supporters. I'd really appreciate that. And then, of course, tomorrow will be my U.S. birthday. I was actually born in the U.S., so I'm not technically 58 years old yet. That will be tomorrow, I think, at 4 in the morning or something, Pacific time. So, anyhow, let's start off the celebration by looking at Lorenzo's excellent score here. So, notice how Lorenzo has submerged the horns behind the clarinets at the beginning here. And I feel that works really, really great. And Lorenzo, you could actually just leave out the surge here of dynamics, and just have the horns be a soft pad behind the clarinet, right? Let the clarinet be the expressive one, right? Because there's nothing in the piano score that actually says that the accompaniment should swell, right? It's the melody that gets bigger and then smaller in terms of the dynamics. I like the way that you've rescored the dynamics overall going forwards. Okay, so that's really nice in terms of consolidating the hairpins, right? We've got soft and then loud. Excuse me, crescendo then diminuendo instead of crescendo, 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 like in the piano score. So that makes a whole lot more sense. The only critique that I would really make here, your balancing is great here in terms of the horns being behind the melody. The critique that I would make, actually two. One is that you really should keep your winds and strings in front of the horns, right? So don't mark your strings pianissimo, right? Mark them piano, and have the horns backing them up, right? And then also we need a destination dynamic for the middle of the hairpins for some of these instruments, right? So I feel it would be better for you to go piano to mezzo forte in the strings and winds. So you would start off here, piano, crescendo to mezzo forte here. Tell us that it's mezzo forte. Don't just assume that everybody is going to understand how big you want to get in the middle of the hairpin, right? One of the things is, like, if you listen to the mock-up, you will hear that this opening episode doesn't really have a lot of power with the way that you've scored it, or with the way that the mock-up is interpreting it, right? So I think that it's really intended to fill in, to just become very colorful, and it's the beginning of this emotional journey for Lili, right? So it can't be understated, right? Like right now, it's a little bit too controlled, right? So I would say pianissimo, crescendo to mezzo piano, crescendo, crescendo to mezzo forte. All right. And yeah, don't think that you need to submerge your accompanying elements behind the melody, right? So that's what this sort of suggests to me. You're saying, oh well, I'll make the clarinet piano and then these other melody instruments piano, but this bassoon, since it's accompanying, that'll be softer. That shouldn't be the way that it is at all. All of the instruments should be the same dynamic if you can score it that way, because the melody will naturally stand out being at the top being over the accompaniment, and also especially how heavily you've scored all of these elements, right? So we're talking a lot about dynamics. Let's talk a little bit more about other things. This is kind of strange. You've got these extra slurs. These are completely unnecessary, okay? Slurs tell the player when to breathe and how long one continuous breath should be used on a note. They don't, like in terms of phrasing, the phrasing is inherent in the scoring, right? Wind players don't need like big long slurs over groups of notes that sort of express like what the musical phrase is, right? Don't use slurs as phrase marks. All right, so that is a big error. And also just think about the inflection of slurring and bowing and breathing, right? So do you really want da 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 da? Do you want that kind of inflection, or do you want da 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 da? Do you know what I mean? Like, where do you want the emphasis to be? Right? Because right now you're putting the emphasis on the third beat, right, rather than on the first beat. This will probably be bowed as a down bow, and then an up bow, and then a down bow and an up bow, and so on. And then here, people will, your clarinet players will just completely ignore this long slur, and they'll connect these two, and then articulate this separately. Connect these two, articulate separately, right? So you cannot just throw away slur markings like this, right? I mean, slurs are the continuity of breath behind a note, right? One note leading to another note, right? They aren't just hey, this is our expressive curve, right? That's useless, all right? That needs to be inherent in the way that it's scored. All right, so that is how to fix these first 8 bars. Now, let's go into the development, okay? Bum ba da da da. So, and this is really nice. See, here you're thinking, you really are using some foresight in terms of bowing, right? Down, up, and good for you for getting the actual melody there, that D sharp to C sharp. And I really like the way that you hold off on these hairpins. You don't add them, right? All right, see, here you say divisi in 2, right? And then you say period. You have to say unis, U-N-I-S period, okay? Doesn't mean, I've never seen that, all right? So unis period for unison. So I like the way that you try to get the balance here. Mezzo piano in your harp versus piano. I would say just mark this mezzo forte, mark the harp mezzo forte, and then just leave it. Okay, and don't worry about these. Maybe go down to piano here. Okay, but that's the sort of force that's going to be needed in order for the harp to be heard accompanying these lower strings. Just sort of wondering whether or not you should slur this little gesture down here. Bum bum. Right, so you're going da dum. So shouldn't this be ba ba instead of dun 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 dun? And all that, all the same, I do like the way that you add color to the strings here and there, right? And then give over from the strings to winds and so on. I think that's very effective. That's a very effective approach for orchestration. Okay. Yeah, da 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 da, and then we hear this lovely addition here of the winds. Now we're going to clarinets and bassoons, so our lower winds, supported by pizzicato, right? And this is interesting. You have pizzicato higher on higher pitches, And then here you have got the pizzicato sort of controlled. It's really kind of the same. It's the same register, right? We've got the same register between both parts. It's just that here you've got clarinets plus bassoons, and then you've got flutes plus clarinets. And this will work. This is pretty well balanced. All right. Now, I've discussed this before, but look, you know, Lorenzo, I have no idea if you've watched any other evaluations, so I'll just repeat my advice, and that is, you cannot mark mezzo staccato with a slur that goes over, that goes past the staccato marks, right? Because mezzo staccato comes from the diaphragm, right? Now staccato without a slur, that's all coming from the articulation of the embouchure, right? So the player's going ta 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 ta, right? But if you put a slur on it, that means right? So it is breath that is it's coming out in short little punches, right? So how can you slur from that short little punch into the next note? That doesn't make any sense at all right? So please, don't slur across a mezzo staccato, right? And furthermore, shouldn't both voices have slurs, right? If that's what you intend. I suspect that you weren't even thinking about mezzo staccato, that you just dropped the slurring from the piano part onto the orchestral part. But just please think about these things, right? A slur over any woodwind part suggests that it is all being done in one breath. The same way as a slur over like if you had marked mezzo staccato here in the strings, that slur would have suggested that it was all of the staccatos would be under the same bow, right? And that also makes no sense, it should just really be one bow, right? So you want this accent to come through, right? Bum, 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 right? And so if there's a slur over that, then that makes no sense either. So it's a piano thing, right? If you put a slur over it and you say, oh, well, this is the phrase, you can't drop that onto an orchestra part, because the orchestra players think differently about their slurs, right? That means a different thing. Okay, now, speaking of slurs, we get to here, and there are no slurs. All right, so do you really want up, or down, up, down, right? Or would you rather have down, or maybe even up, down, up? It just depends on how the players, or maybe one bow, da, or even like down, up, or down, up, down, right? So you have to really think about this. Okay, now I've talked about before balancing brass against winds, right? And suggesting winds and strings be around the same dynamic level, and then the brass be one dynamic level lower, right? Now here we have a situation where you are heavily dividing your violas and cellos. That means that there is going to be 1/4 as many violas on each pitch as normally would play a single pitch, and there will be 1/3 as many cellos on each pitch as will be playing a single pitch. Okay, so we take that into account. These are that each single line within this chorale has far less force, has far less projection power, and so on. Now, the way that you have scored this, you are going to barely hear any strings. Okay, so if you want a beautiful blend of these violas, which is a great idea, by the way, so if you want a beautiful blend of violas and cellos plus winds, then you need to back off your your winds considerably, right? I would even say piano, like just mark all of these guys piano, and then you'll get, or maybe mezzo piano, right? Then you'll get a better blend between the two groups, right? So you'll hear the more soloistic sound of these fewer strings per voice, right? And then you end here, piano and pianissimo, beautifully balanced, right? You'll still hear the horns contributing more than blending, but it's still a great idea. Okay, and once again, unis, right? Not un, right? UNIS period is the proper abbreviation. Now, here, I don't feel that that the harp is really strong enough to punctuate the downbeat here, right? I mean, you could maybe score fortissimo on that, but the double bass is really shoving this accented E on the bottom here. I think it would be, would pretty much obliterate the harp here. I mean, I know it's like there's some balance in implied here, mezzo forte, and then forte in the harp. I think if you really wanted a plucking kind of a sound, or some kind of punctuated sound, it might be better to have like a touch of timpani there, or maybe half pizzicato, half arco in the double basses. I mean, because I don't feel that the harp is strong enough here to really go pluck. It's just not really going to come through. All right. Now here you can go all mezzo forte because we don't have so much divisi, right? So everything is pretty much one or two voices per group, and that comes through fine. But what's going on here with these slurs? You're like slurring one voice. You're slurring one voice, like the second voice, right? Shouldn't all of these first voices get a slur? Right? I think we've got some proofreading errors here. All right, and here too, right? Now, now that we've solved that little problem, are you sure that you don't want an articulation on the downbeat, right? Do you just really want this to be da, or do you want da da, or even da da da, or maybe da da da? Right. So just like do not be satisfied with the piano slur, right? Just really think about it. What is each slur saying? Like I like this da 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 da. So down up, or actually you're going down. Yeah, divisi right here, right? And here. And this is all fine. I like the little touch of tambourine. So the scoring here is it's fine. And then you have your little answering, you come in, bum, bum. Then you're going to go dun, 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 dun. So let's turn the page. So that's the first note of that little phrase. Once again, looks like you are missing the slur on the first voice. Yeah, and this is very cool. Very sort of Russian, or maybe kind of like late Brahms sounding grouping of lower winds. Now, do you really want, like, if you have short slurs on things in your strings, you help with bowing and so on. Do you really need them to be longer in your winds? Da 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 da. Oh, that's great. So ba da. Just think about that, because like, you can get a beautiful emphatic sound on certain notes by lining up the articulations in, whether it's a bowing or tongue, right? Just to get them to all line up together. I mean, you're not slurring your horns here, right? So why slur across all three beats in your flutes and clarinets? Now let's talk about the about how well this may or may not be orchestrated. Okay, so right in here you've got this you got a combination of in the melody of first violin and clarinet. And this flute right in here is not really going to add very much weight to or color because it is so it is such a weak range for the flute, right? It might add a little bit of something, but seeing as how you've also got some horns right in there, who that are sort of brightening things up. The second flute is kind of is kind of unnecessary. Now I noticed that here you've got one voice and here you've got two voices, right? So is this a two or is this just a single voice? So you have to tell us, right, which clarinet that is. All right, so this is going to be fairly bright, but it's not uncontrollable going up to this written D and going up to this higher trombone scoring. It's not completely, it's not too wild. Mezzo piano, I mean, it would be nice if we knew mezzo piano going to what dynamic, right? Like if it's eventually going to be like mezzo forte compared to everybody else playing forte, that would be really important. Yeah, and then we've got harp, a little touch of antique cymbal. All right, now octaves with I'm looking at this. Yeah, okay, so with clarinet and oboe, first clarinet, first oboe, then going to harmony, flute on top. So, just kind of curious. How come there is no doubling of strings on this top line? The danger here is that the sound of the flute will get absorbed in, this flute will just be riding above the texture, and it may well get absorbed into the sound of the unison winds below it, right? So the unison winds and strings below it playing the melody may very well absorb this top line of flute. Of course, I mean, the flute can play out soloistically, right? But that's just a phenomenon which actually the classical composers used intentionally. There are, especially in Mozart, Mozart actually did not like the flute. He was not one of his favorite instruments, and he only usually used one flute in his orchestral works. And oftentimes he used it in a way that it would just add a little bit of shine to the melody and the strings an octave below, right? And if you listen to some older and especially period recordings of Mozart, you'll actually hear that phenomenon of the flute getting absorbed into the string. So you kind of, you hear this shine. You would hear it if it went away, but yeah. Okay. Then, so, I mean, this will more or less work. Yeah. But I would just say, make sure that you define your dynamics a little bit better and just watch out, if you're not going to double this line here. This actually happened quite a few times. More in section B, but with around this area, orchestrators opting to have the flute play an octave higher than everything else, or just like some wind instrument would play an octave higher than the strings combined with winds below. And that doesn't always work out that well, right? You have that one sort of naked that naked flute or clarinet just kind of hanging above a very full, thick texture below, right? Okay. And then here, you end up with this sort of diaphanous, beautiful, soft, intimate solo suddenly high, right? So like if the strings were playing along with the flute, the first violins were doubling the flute up here, then this wouldn't seem like it was just such a sudden leap, right? It really just feels like it's a sudden leap and everybody is playing solo up here. All right, now let's go on to bum bum. So we have the restatement, da da da, and where are the slurs in the first voice? For all that though, that's I mean, your problem here is that you are assuming that the second flute will be strong enough to blend in a satisfying way with the second oboe, and it's not really, right? Not till you get up to like say around C sharp and maybe D sharp here. So the lower notes are kind of wasted, but I mean it's doable, but it's just it is almost unnecessary with the way that you've got it scored. What if you had, well, I don't know. You like that, you want that blended sound of oboe plus flute, right? And you want it in octave, so that's fine. And you keep the scoring soft enough to where it's not just a total waste, right? Right. So you're going piano, poco, crescendo, and then down to pianissimo. But don't you mean to go up to mezzo piano, right? Just mark everybody the same and tell them where they're going. Where are they going? They're going up to mezzo piano. We can see this in the piccolo part. Yeah, and a little bit of glockenspiel and harp. That's lovely. That's really nice. Now here we get to plus long. Okay, so look, it was really slow in the mock-up. That was incredibly slow. So he wants things, or sorry, she wants things to be slower. Like it's almost like saying meno, right? But here I think you brought it down to grave, not plus long, right? So you made it really, really, really slow. I feel ponderously slow. Apologies for the sort of negative comment, but yeah, I feel it was just way too slow. So there is a way of right. So so this is kind of like it's almost like saying tempo primo, right? Is what's going on here. So we go back to the tempo primo. We have rallentando, and then it's slower, but not necessarily incredibly slow, right? All right. Now here you say meta, right? Now I'm just kind of wondering why you feel that you need to use half of your strings here. If you do that, the consequences are that when they that the strings will not blend with the oboe here. It will really be all about the oboe with a little bit of string icing. I feel you're way safer just using all of your strings, right? Rather than using half of your strings. Okay. Here we're getting into that final episode, right? So I will try to comment on it with all due diligence. I really love the septuplets here. I kind of wonder whether or not it could be scored without the dots on it, right? If it could just, if the player could just see this as 7 beats and not, I think the dots are just confusing. Yes, they make sense mathematically, but I think that you could have also just put a septuplet here in eighth notes or what other value, without bringing the dots in. Yeah, so this is nice. So do you really want this to be measured this way? You know, da da. Or do you want it to be more like fluttering, like unmeasured? Da da. You know what I mean? Just like the kind of lovely fluttering fingered tremolo. I mean, this feels to me more like a fingered unmeasured tremolo than a fingered measured tremolo. Um, and I'm seeing some, several scores recently where something really seems as if it were intended to be unmeasured, but it's only marked with two beams rather than three, right? So three would give you an unmeasured tremolo, and two gives you a measured tremolo of 16th notes going back and forth, right? That's what that means. Now, this is kind of strange. You go dum, and here you go down, up, down. So are you sure you want that? That slurring style? And it's kind of strange the way you've got the slur going to the end of this note, and then you only have the slur going to the beginning of this note here, right? To the beginning of the tie. So this is the kind of thing that just drives the copyist crazy because they don't know what you mean, right? They may think, oh, he's made some mistakes in the slurs, and they may just make the decision for you to add some slurs in there that make more sense, and then you lost your chance to make the decision, right? The other thing too is, do you really want a diaphragmatic accent here? Like whenever you put a slur across an accent, the accent is inside of a slur. That means that the player will have to punch the accent, just like we were talking about with mezzo staccato, right? They're going to have to punch it with their diaphragm rather than tonguing it, right? So rather than, let's say that there were no slurs, so they would go da da ta, right? So if there were no slurs on this, they would be tonguing this. Now, with the way that you got it, it's da, right? So the person has to punch with their diaphragm because they're still engaged there. Or they might just ignore you and then just get a tongued accent right in there. So anyways, just think about the consequences, all right? And then this is all mezzo staccato, the way that you've got it scored. And once again, the first voice slurs are missing. Okay, and this is acceptable. The slurring with groups of notes and rests. All right, so you get a slightly stickier staccato. So this is nice. I mean, you've got your little celesta, and we've got our harp harmonics. Okay, so far, like going up to A natural, that is the range, right? So that is the upper limit of harmonics as far as I'm concerned. Okay, now occasionally you'll see one that's higher, I say like from Ravel or some other composers. But really, in terms of effective playing, it's really better to see the A as an upper limit. All right? All right. So at this point, we have kind of set our formula, right? Which is oboe and English horn and octaves doubled by first violin and viola. And yeah, I really think that you should have the same slurs in both parts, right? And maybe try this strategy, da da, right? As opposed to da 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 and da from your oboes, all right? All right, now we're adding bassoon down here, right? Sort of firming that up, but it's the same exact strategy again, celesta and harp and our little floating flute and piccolo and so on, and the same strategy here. Okay. Once again, I do not feel that this is strong enough to really punctuate the downbeat here, right? As the music climbs, we see the bassoon kind of taking over to make this into a triple octave. English horn, could probably do everything except for the low D, right? But English horn could easily do this middle voice in here. That's totally within its scope to do that. The only thing that I wonder about here is that we are not doubling the first bassoon, and that's completely possible here with the violas. Like the violas could be playing octaves, they can reach that low D. So you could have the violas doubling the bassoon on the bottom and the second oboe or English horn in the middle. Okay, and then violas, violins on this. We're starting to get more rock bottom notes here from the bassoon. Yeah, and pretty much the same thing. So now you've given up on your harmonics, and that's fine. That works good. All right, and then pretty much kind of the same thing again. We're getting just very, very, very high here, and then that is doubled by piccolo, and then a due on the oboes, doubling the violas, and I think that works great. Yeah, that should be fine. And then you kind of give off. I mean, you leave off with the winds doubling the this cascading downward stuff, and you've got your Glock in there too. This all is very nice. It's very charming, and you're keeping your horns in the background nice and soft. You're just playing that pad. I would submit to you that your clarinets need to be louder there. Okay, this is just too soft, right? The horns will absorb the sound of the clarinets if you are this soft with it. The clarinets should be around the same dynamic level as the strings, right? So here you're going pianissimo, the strings, yeah, so all of this fluttering stuff needs to be a little louder going into this, all right? So I would say bring up clarinets and strings to like piano or mezzo piano, but leave the horns in the background. Okay, and then, yeah, diminuendo, that's all working great. Okay, so now we have our final our final section here. Now, I am not sure if I think that there's something out of balance here with respect, okay? And that is this trombone here. Now, did you notice how much it stuck out of it protruded out of the mix in your mock-up? That is actually real life. Your trombone is going to stand out, and I think it's lovely to use trombone in there. I have no problem with the trombone itself, but I feel it should be marked down to piano, and I would put the dynamic up here, right? So just right. Hang on. Keeps wanting to jump. Okay, so I would put that right there. So let's look at the orchestration of it. All right, so we've just got this. We've got our pedal being played by double basses, tuba. This needs to be balanced a little bit better. Try having the tuba play triple P, okay? And same thing with your bass trombone. Now, this is really, really isolated. Your bass trombone is so much higher, right? I feel like you could score this with octaves, like divisi octaves in your double basses, and then drop the bass trombone an octave, and then leave it out going further. All right, because I think you just need more. You need a little bit more weight on the very bottom there, or just add a contrabassoon. And there are some problems you could solve earlier in this piece with contrabassoon, right? And then just have contrabassoon on the bottom, tuba on the top, and then octaves in your double basses. Okay, now the melody, piccolo plus harp plus Glock plus celesta plus 2 solo violins. Okay. Now, I think the solo violins are probably going to have the least amount of weight here, right? They're going to probably add the least amount to the picture, but leaving them in is fine. Yeah. I mean, look, if everything is really, really, really soft, then that's one thing. I'm not so convinced by the way that you are building you are surging into this and going all the way up to mezzo forte on this high A sharp, and then going diminuendo down to pianissimo on high A sharp. That is just going to kill your French horn player, right? I mean, yeah, it's these brass parts are placed too high, right? Starting from the bass trombone being all the way up there, right? Everything is just placed too high. All of these pitches are really also, they're being covered by other elements in like the clarinets and everything else, oboes. So there's no need for the brass to be pushed so high. Now, of course, it's like, G sharp, a high G sharp going down to pianissimo is going to be difficult enough for your trumpets. But high A sharp, that's 2 semitones away from high C, and you're asking them to go down to pianissimo there, right? And to be really controlled when they enter here and be, it is not, there will be a really nervous sound to this at its best, okay? And it won't have this beautiful blended wash. So this is where, just as Conrad Pope wrote in his very gracious introduction to my book, 100 More Orchestration Tips. This is where mock-ups will betray you, right? Like where the experience of the actual player doesn't count for anything, right? And you will end up scoring things that will get you into real trouble, right? So the sounding note of A sharp is actually C sharp. Is D sharp, concert D sharp, and that would be a perfectly easy note for the trumpet to play, D sharp 5. So the second D sharp above middle C. That would be a very easy note for the trumpet player to play down to pianissimo, right? So everything needs to come down in your brass. Okay, and the dynamic of the trombone needs to be carefully controlled, right? English horn, you're doing a combination of English horn plus trombone, and that's a little, yeah. I mean, I would almost feel that would be a little risky, to the point at which you would really have to make the decision to have the English horn be the stronger voice, right? And the trombone to play behind it a little bit. And that hasn't been worked out in the dynamics. Like, you wrote mezzo piano here. You didn't write anything for your English horn, so we don't know, right? And then we've got antique cymbals on that, and cello, playing the same note, still in treble clef. Yeah. I see what you're trying to do here. You're adding these elements, right? But look, if everybody is pianissimo, right, and the softer instruments are piano, with a little bit of a surge upwards to say like piano, like not very loud, right? Not up to mezzo forte, mezzo piano. All right, so just up to piano and then down. So there's no need for the cello to be mezzo forte here. It could just be piano espressivo, okay? So piano espressivo, pianissimo, pianissimo, right? And then you will get a nice blend right in there. But going all the way up to mezzo forte, having this high A sharp in the horn, that's not going to work, okay? So just reimagine this. And then after you've reimagined that and rescored that, maybe used whichever of my suggestions are useful to you, Lorenzo, try to get this performed. See if there's an orchestra around you that does reading sessions, or or see if you can talk to a conductor that you know and see if you can get a reading of this, or maybe a rehearsal and performance. I've said this before throughout this orchestration challenge in my evaluations, but wouldn't it be great if the world was suddenly flooded with orchestrations of this piece and there were orchestras all over playing different versions, right? Not like one sainted version, like the Ravel version, right, which everybody will look at as like being the best one. We now have like 146 versions of this piece. Some of them by developing composers or developing orchestrators, but I mean there are easily half of these evaluations are full length and are probably in a state where they could be brought up to speed and made ready for stands and be read and be enjoyed by audiences. I don't think I've ever seen such a great outpouring of craft and imagination as a teacher or a coach ever. So, I mean, what a waste it would be if all of these went back into the shelf and nobody ever heard them. So seriously, Lorenzo, I don't know what your situation is on the ground, but maybe you are a conductor, or maybe you know somebody who's got a community or a regional orchestra, that might be a little easier to get an in on rather than like a big professional orchestra. But wow, if you could get a big professional orchestra to perform this, that would be great. And I would say the impetus would even be stronger for you to correct some of these problems, right? And then get a score that was just really amazing. And, maybe your version would be the one that everybody played. And if I had if I had 0.1% to do with its success, then I would be honored. So get that together, and all that remains for me to do is to thank you so much for your support on Patreon and like helping me keep the channel going and supporting these challenges and being a member of the Orchestration Online community. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your presence in these orchestration challenges. I cannot wait to see what you would do with next year's challenge, which is going to be very special. Okay, so thank you. Thanks everybody for watching all the way to this point. I think Lorenzo's got a great score here, and I will just go straight on to the next evaluation this morning.